Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Turnstile Talk, where we take a fast pass to the deepest corners of theme park history. No height requirement, but a love for all things theme parks is strongly recommended. Now, before we jump in, if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor and hitting that like and subscribe button, it really does help the channel. Now, today we're doing something a little different. Instead of diving into a single attraction or park like I usually do, we're actually going to be breaking down the process of designing and building a theme park attraction, from that very first sketch on a napkin all the way to opening day. If you've ever walked off a ride and thought, how did they even come up with this? Or if you've had aspirations yourself to become a theme park designer or be a part of that design process, well, buckle up, because the answer is a whole lot more complex than you think. Let's dive in. Attraction begins in the blue sky phase, and despite the name, this isn't just a bunch of Imagineers or creatives staring out a window doodling castles in the clouds. Blue sky is ideation at its most raw. It's the moment when creative leads and writers, designers and concept artists, and sometimes even show directors come together to ask one question: what haven't we done yet? This is the phase where no idea is too big, too weird, or too expensive. The only rule is that there are no rules, at least at first, of course. And while it might sound like a creative free-for-all, the best blue sky work is still guided by story structure, brand intent, and emotional clarity. A good concept isn't just a ride where you go upside down 6 times, it's why you're going upside down. What does it feel like? What story moment does that thrill represent? Here's how it usually starts. Someone pitches a core narrative hook. Maybe it's you're escaping a collapsing alien prison, or maybe it's you're helping a mischievous cartoon rabbit pull off a bank heist. That hook then gets tossed around the room, picked apart, reworked. Writers layer in character arcs. Visual artists throw together mood boards and tone sketches and color palettes to express how the experience feels. Production designers start imagining what kind of space this would live in. Would it be a cave, a city, a jungle, an interdimensional vortex? And most critically, the team considers what ride system would best tell this story. Because at this point, a good blue sky pitch starts aligning form with function. If you're building a chase scene, maybe you're looking at a high-speed launch coaster. If it's more narrative driven, perhaps you need a dark ride system or even something new entirely. And this is also where the crazy ideas are really allowed to breathe. What if a ride vehicle could detach from a track and float through a room? What if your coaster jumped a gap? What if the ride was different every time based on your choices? These ideas might not be realistic, yet in blue sky, that's not the point. This is where emotional tone gets locked in, whether it's the eerie buildup of Haunted Mansion or the frantic chaos of Revenge of the Mummy. Because here's the truth. The most iconic attractions in the world don't just tell stories. They evoke specific feelings, mystery and wonder and nostalgia and triumph. Take Haunted Mansion, for example. That ride isn't just a tour of spooky rooms. It's a slow, elegant descent into absurdist horror. You go from quiet dread to giddy laughter all in 7 minutes, and all of that was shaped in the blue sky phase. Or alternatively, look at Velocicoaster, for example. On the surface, yeah, it's just a coaster, but it's exactly what makes it brilliant. Universal Creative used the blue sky phase to flip the concept on its head. What if a coaster wasn't the escape from the story, but the story itself? They decided to lean into intensity, creating a narrative that justified every launch, every inversion, and every terrifying near miss. You're not just riding alongside raptors, you're being hunted. The launches aren't just speed, they're propulsion out of danger. The barrel roll over the lagoon isn't just a stunt, it's a final frantic escape. It's a story built around adrenaline and precision, and that tone was locked in during Blue Sky. Everything else, the cue, the rockwork, the raptor animatronics, supports that core emotional intent. Survive the hunt. But here's the part nobody really likes to talk about. Most blue sky ideas never leave the room. There are graveyards filled with unrealized concepts, spectacular, fully sketched, emotionally potent ideas that were technically feasible but never made it past a whiteboard. Why, you might ask? Well, there are 3 reasons: budget, space, and synergy. Budget is the obvious one that you go to. I mean, if an idea requires inventing a new ride system, it's probably not going to happen because it's expensive. Now, space is another killer. You might have the next Symbolica on your hands, but if the park doesn't have the real estate, it's a no-go. And the real heartbreaker out of all of these is synergy. A pitch could be the most creative and mind-blowing concept ever written, but if it doesn't align with the studio's franchise priorities, it's dead on arrival. That's how you get projects shelved in favor of a safer bet. An original dark ride might get replaced by a Frozen overlay. A bold non-IP coaster pitch might lose out to a superhero reskin. It's not always about creativity, it's often actually about politics. But when something does survive this phase, when it checks every box, that's when a project gets greenlit for the next phase: concept development. The napkin sketch becomes a pitch deck. A hallway conversation becomes a line item in a $1 billion expansion plan. And just like that, the dream starts becoming real. But the wild open air of blue sky is always where the journey begins. Now, once an idea survives blue sky, it's moved into the next battlefield, as mentioned: concept design and story development. And here's where things start to get real. That vague idea of a thrilling dark ride through a ghost-infested lighthouse has to evolve into an actual tangible experience. One with floor plans and budgets and safety considerations and, yes, just like all other businesses, PowerPoint decks. This is where the creative team rolls up their sleeves and begins turning possibility into plausibility. The core idea gets broken down into its foundational elements. Things like, what's the guest's role in the story? Where does the journey begin and end? What are the major narrative beats? And crucially, how does the ride system serve that story? The result of all that is the pitch package, or pitch deck. It's a dense, heavily illustrated document that acts as the project's creative Bible. You'll see story treatments laying out the plot scene by scene, mood boards that establish color palettes and lighting language and architectural references. You'll find elevation sketches, top-down diagrams, and even ride flow animations that simulate what guests will actually experience. Think of this phase like writing a screenplay, building the set, and casting the actors all at once. Every department, whether it be creative, engineering, safety, show, they all start to chime in, and suddenly the idea has to withstand real-world physics. Then comes the ride layout. This is where the magic of spatial storytelling truly takes over. Designers begin sketching the guest journey beat by beat. Where are the transitions? Where does the tension rise? And when does the story breathe? When does it hit you in the face with adrenaline? The layout isn't just about space. It's about emotion. A tight corridor might make you feel trapped. A sudden reveal into a massive cavern could evoke awe. A controlled stop in front of a key animatronic might deliver critical exposition. Even the turns of the track can be used to mirror narrative tension. Are you spiraling out of control, or are you gliding towards safety? Physical scale models come into play here, and yes, they're still a very major tool that is used in pretty much every theme park design firm and major theme park company that there is. Whether they're made from foam board, 3D prints, or balsa wood, they let the team see and feel the space in a way that even the best digital rendering can't quite replicate. Meanwhile, digital walkthroughs are built to test sightlines, pacing, and scenic reveals. These aren't just flashy VR demos, they're tools for creative alignment and client buy-in. Want to prove that waterfall reveal hits just after the story's midpoint? Load up the walkthrough and ride it for yourself. And now the battle truly begins. This is the phase where creative and operations enter the arena. And trust me, they don't always play nice. Creative wants immersion. They want dark, narrow corridors dripping with mood and fog where you can't see what's coming next. Ops, on the other hand, they want throughput. They want wide, well-lit paths, 36 inches of ADA clearance, emergency exits every 200 feet, and cameras in every blind spot. Creative wants a surprise drop track. Ops wants to know how many seconds it takes to reset that track so they can hit hourly capacity. And around it goes. This isn't a minor scuffle. It's a core structural tension in attraction development. Creative is trying to build an emotional journey. Operations is trying to run a business. But, and here's the important part, when the push and pull is handled with respect, the result is a better product. The creative team is forced to prioritize, and the ops team is pushed to innovate. Maybe that foggy corridor can have timed lighting. Maybe that drop track can reset faster with better pneumatics. Maybe that 6-minute show can still hit 1,800 guests per hour. Some of the best attractions in the world, whether it be Spider-Man or Forbidden Journey or Mystic Manor, they didn't get there because creative won the fight. They got there because everyone stayed in the fight together. Now, by the end of this phase, the attraction has gone from napkin sketch to Project Bible. The story is nailed down, the tone is locked, the major scenes are plotted, and the ride system is provisionally selected. The creative intent is crystal clear, at least for now. Because from this point forward, the dream gets handed off to engineers and schedulers and estimators and fabricators, the people whose job is to turn that dream into something that won't collapse, catch fire, or bankrupt the company. But even as it enters new hands, the DNA of the attraction is already set. It's no longer an idea. It's becoming real. And if concept design is where a dream gets its first skeleton, schematic design is where that skeleton gets nerves and muscles and a budget line. This is the phase where engineers walk in, the creatives take a slight step back, and the mood in the room shifts from, wouldn't it be cool if, to, okay, but how does this actually work? Every inch of the attraction starts getting mapped out in painful, exquisite detail. We're talking construction documents, architectural plans, mechanical specs, system diagrams, electrical loads, plumbing pathways, fire codes, HVAC zoning, all layered into a sprawling collaborative document set that will define how the entire project is built. This is the bridge between imagination and implementation. So let's start with the ride system. If your attraction is a tried and true off-the-shelf system, say a Bolliger and Mabillard coaster or a standard trackless dark ride from ETF, then this phase is about integrating the physical requirements into your show environment. However, if your ride system is custom, much like Rise of the Resistance or Escape from Gringotts, then congratulations, you have just opened Pandora's box. Custom ride systems involve a massive coordination effort between multiple departments, most notably ride engineering, which is how it moves, show control, which is when it moves, software programming, which is why it moves, and scenic design, which is what it's moving around. The feedback loop is truly constant and chaotic. You want the vehicle to rotate 180 degrees at this moment? Cool. Now the turntable has to be reinforced. That adds weight. That changes the load requirements. That affects the motor. That increases the electrical load. Now you need more power. That changes your conduit plan, which pushes out the wall, which breaks your sight line. You get the idea. This is where the dominoes truly start to fall. AV and show systems kick into high gear now too. Projection surfaces are finalized, including the size and shape and throw distance of every image. Speakers are specified down to wattage, placement, and directionality. Server rooms get sized and placed, ventilation gets added, backup systems get wired in, and audio routing diagrams begin to look like the wiring for a space shuttle. Show lighting plans now have to account for everything. Beam angles and color temperatures, DMX networks. That gorgeous spotlight reveal you planned during storyboards? Great. Now, figure out how to hang the fixture and keep it hidden and still within reach of a ladder. And while we're talking about tech, let's not forget about life safety. Schematic design is when compliance rears its head. You'll hear terms like NFPA, IBC, ADA, ASTM, each one representing hundreds of pages of rules about egress paths and lighting levels and fire suppression and more. Every single guest, staff member, and tech needs a clear and compliant way in and out, which means your moody pitch black maze now needs egress lighting and illuminated exit signs and panic bars and timed fail-safes. And if that ruins the vibe, tough. Now let's talk about money. This is the phase where estimators come in, and they bring calculators and spreadsheets and a bucket of cold water for your dreams. They go line by line through every system. They ask questions like how many speakers and how many feet of track, how many lighting fixtures, and how long will it take to install, test, and commission. What follows is the first of many budget bloodbaths. And it all happens under a very polite phrase you'll hear over and over again in the industry: value engineering, or VE. Now, VE is the industry's euphemism for cutting things to save money. That incredible rotating tunnel you pitch that inverts the guest sense of gravity? Well, sorry, the motion base costs too much and maintenance hates it. Cut. That multi-figure animatronic with 12 points of articulation and lip sync? No. Replace it with a projection. Or a silhouette. Or, in worst case, a static figure with the light on it. Every idea becomes a line item. Every line item gets a price. And if the budget isn't there, it has to go. This is where many attractions start to lose their soul. Sometimes it's death by 1,000 cuts. The fog gets removed and the soundtrack gets simplified and the lighting package shrinks. Other times it's a single catastrophic cut that reshapes the whole experience. An entire ride scene might get condensed into a mural. A vehicle feature might be deactivated forever. And here's the kicker: none of these decisions are final. Because as construction ramps up, schematic design evolves into detailed design. Each is a more refined version of the same thing. But this is the phase where the big bones of the project are locked. Where's the track? How tall is the building? Where are the walls, the control rooms, the maintenance hatches? You can still change things, but every change now costs time and money and momentum. And from this point on, your creative vision is only as strong as your ability to defend it through logistics. This is where the dream becomes a blueprint, where imagination becomes infrastructure, and where the war for your attraction soul is not fought in pitch rooms, but in Revit models, Excel sheets, and clash detection reports. Now, we've talked enough about design and the very high frequency of schematic design and detail design, so let's talk a little bit more about fabrication and mock-ups and the art of actually building the thing. Once the drawings are done and the budgets are mostly locked, the attraction enters the phase that's part art studio and part machine shop and truly part miracle. Fabrication, mock-ups, and show programming. This is where the magic finally leaves the screen and enters the real world. Let's start with fabrication. At this point, your attraction is split up and handed off to a network of specialty vendors. Scenic shops and sculptors, welders, scenic painters, animatronic manufacturers, the whole gamut. Each one is responsible for building their piece of the puzzle. Want to bring a rotting pirate ship to life? That gets handed to your scenic team. They'll carve the hull from EPS foam, hard-coat it with urethane, layer in textured fiberglass for weathering, and finally hand it over to a scenic painter for distressing, aging, mossing, and grime. Got a six-legged alien bartender animatronic? That's going to a shop like Gardner Holt or Life Formations, where they'll build a full armature with pneumatic or electric actuators, install a control system, and then apply silicone skin. Color-matched, airbrushed, and often fitted with real hair, embedded lighting, or even sweat effects. Want that one wall to shimmer like bioluminescent algae when a guest walks by? That's going to a specialty FX fabricator who's mixing phosphorescent paint with pressure sensors and DMX triggers. And while all of that is happening off site, something equally massive is happening on site: construction. The ride building is going vertical, structural steel is being craned in, and ride footers are being poured. Every phase of scenic fabrication has to time perfectly with site readiness, because once it's time to install, you've got a very narrow window to make it all fit and function. But before anything gets shipped to the field, we truly hit a critical milestone: mock-ups. Now, mock-ups are full-scale, fully built samples of specific moments or environments from the attraction, not renderings, not VR walkthroughs, but actual physical builds. Think: one portion of a queue, one vehicle seat, or one corner of a scenic set. It's truly a small part of a greater whole. Why, you might ask? Well, because this is where you test your assumptions. You can measure sight lines, so can guests see the main figure from every seat. You can check durability. Does the fogger corrode the paint after a week of continuous use? You can truly evaluate the guest experience. Is the water spray refreshing, or are you soaking your guests at 9 a.m.? Is that lighting cue too blinding to a person? You would be shocked how often something looks flawless on paper but falls apart in mock-up. That animated statue might be too tall. That projection screen could be too washed out. That audio mix might sound great in headphones but awful in a concrete showbox. And that's the point. This is your last chance to fail safely. After this, changes become exponentially more expensive. Now let's talk about the phase that separates the great attractions from truly forgettable ones: show programming and integration. Once the ride structure is installed, ride vehicles are commissioned, and scenic elements are in place, the building becomes a living machine, and someone has to make it move. This is where the show control team steps in. They're a hybrid crew of programmers and engineers and technicians and even artists. Their job is to synchronize every single moving part of the show to the millisecond. Some of the areas include lighting, sound, animatronics, ride vehicle positioning, and even every single sensor and trigger in the attraction. It's not just about turning things on, it's about orchestration. If the Raptor animatronic lunges before the audio cue hits, it feels robotic. If it lunges after, it feels sluggish. But if it lunges in perfect sync with the lighting strobe, the snarl, and the shaking catwalk beneath your feet, now you've got drama. That's what show integration is. And it is brutal. Teams often work overnight shifts for weeks or even months, living inside hard hats and headsets, running the same 30 seconds of a ride over and over again. They're tweaking small things like lighting curves and adjusting timing and fine-tuning scare beats. And if you're lucky, you get the time to do it right. If you're not, then the attraction opens with timing that's off, figures that lag, media loops that skip, or even worse, effects that are turned off entirely because no one had time to program them properly. And the audience feels it. Always. This phase is the heartbeat of any modern attraction. It's where the illusion either holds together or cracks under pressure. When it's done right, it's breathtaking, invisible, and seamless. You'll never notice it. It's truly a symphony of systems working in perfect harmony. But when it's rushed, well, you can hear the audio loop reset and the projection doesn't match the dialogue and the animatronic lags by just a half a second. And the spell, it breaks. Show programming isn't just the last step, it's the most fragile and truly one of the most critical. Now, we've gotten to the fun part, because after years of planning and design and engineering, we finally arrive at the test and adjust phase, the industry term for what you might know better as technical rehearsals. This is the point where the attraction is technically built, but it's not quite ready for guests. It still needs tuning and finessing and polish. Think of it like a Broadway show in previews. Everything is on stage and everyone knows their lines, but you're still adjusting the lighting and trimming the fat and figuring out which parts actually land. So, starting with the ride system, ride vehicles obviously undergo extensive cycle testing. They run sometimes for hundreds or even thousands of laps without guests, and truly it's most of the time closer to thousands. Engineers are watching for literally everything. It could be e-stop protocols, it could be brake timing, it could be vehicle-to-vehicle spacing. It's because every second matters. All of those seconds add up to throughput, which, if you didn't know, is how many people you can safely move through the attraction per hour. If the ride is dispatching 5 seconds too slow, you could literally be losing hundreds of guests per day and millions in capacity over time. And it's not just about capacity, it's about redundancy. Can the ride recover from a fault without shutting down? Can it run in reduced mode if an effect fails? Does the emergency power system keep critical lights and audio online? Every single scenario is tested. This phase is also when all of the effects get synced to the ride's motion. Now you might say, hold on a second, shouldn't that be taken care of during the show programming phase? Well, in theory, it should be locked in during that phase, but in practice, it truly never is. Because now you're seeing the full ride with motion and pacing and real physical dynamics. And suddenly, that animatronic reveal feels too fast, or the media projection doesn't quite land right. It just needs to feel natural. So programmers and integrators are now in crunch mode. They pull back-to-back overnight shifts, adjusting audio syncs and light fades and safety triggers. Every single animation curve is reviewed, adjusted, and tested again. Sometimes you're working with very tight margins. So a guest might see something for 2 seconds, and in that 2 seconds, the sound, light, and motion all need to hit perfectly, or the illusion dies. This is truly where it's make or break. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, operations is starting to mobilize. Ride operators and maintenance techs and even guest service reps are being trained and drilled on every inch of the attraction. How do you load and unload efficiently? What happens during a power loss? How do you handle a crying child mid-ride or a breakdown in the final scene? At the same time, signage is finalized, queue loops are adjusted, guest flow is tested, and queue line entertainment, if you're lucky enough to get some, is stress tested for real-world pacing. You may also see adjustments to the queue line layout, or your fast pass or lightning lane or express pass configuration, because now the theoretical numbers are meeting actual human behavior, and that never truly goes how you planned. Then you get to the moment of truth, soft opening. This is also known as technical rehearsals for guests. And when this is public, guests get to access the ride for the very first time. Sometimes it's done quietly with no warning. Theme parks are notorious for this. A ride just opens its gates and says, come try it. Other times it's a full marketing rollout, so you have preview days and annual pass holder events and team member previews. But soft openings serve one purpose: data. Things like guest feedback and how guests move through the queue spaces, the load and unload speed with real people, and most importantly, what breaks. Because things will break. Sensors fail and animatronics glitch, safety triggers are tripped unnecessarily, and now you're fixing those problems live, often overnight, and while the ride runs during the day. Soft openings can last a few days, weeks, in rare cases, even months, depending on how far off the mark the attraction is from show ready. And if you're very lucky, the process is relatively smooth and adjustments are minimal. Guests are blown away. But if you're not, well, then you get things like harmonious or, even worse, Fast and Furious supercharged. Attractions that open unfinished, undertested, or overpromised. There are effects that don't work. There are attractions that don't move. Narrative beats that don't land. Guests are confused and reviews are brutal. And no amount of post-opening polish can fix a bad first impression. So technical rehearsals are more than just a dry run. They're the final test, a crucible of operational stress and creative evaluation and real-world physics. Because the guests, they don't care how hard you worked. They only care about what they feel. And in this phase, you learn whether you're delivering awe or excuses. Now, the big day has come, and opening day is truly a milestone. It's the ribbon cutting and the media blitz, the social media fireworks. The dream has been built and programmed and tested and staffed and finally unveiled to the world. But let's be very clear about one thing. Opening day is never the end. It's just the beginning of the next phase, one that's quieter, longer, and far less glamorous. It's the operational phase. Because from the moment an attraction opens, it starts to break down, slowly and quietly and inevitably. Animatronic skins begin to crack from repeated motion and UV exposure. Projectors start to dim and shift out of alignment. Fog machines clog, sync cannons run dry, audio loops drift out of sync, and motion bases start to lag by fractions of a second. Fractions that the average guest can feel, even if they don't consciously realize it. It happens fast, and unless a park is willing to actively maintain the illusion, show quality can start deteriorating within weeks of opening. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Not every park is willing to do that. Looking at the two biggest themed entertainment giants, Disney used to do this. For decades, the company's operational culture was defined by a ruthless dedication to show quality. Burnt-out bulbs were changed overnight, and animatronics were repaired the same day. Props were repainted before guests ever noticed wear. You would never catch a broken effect limping along for weeks. That set the gold standard. Universal still does, mostly. They built a culture around aggressive preventative maintenance, also known as PMs, especially for their marquee attraction. If Spider-Man's projectors go out of focus or the Forbidden Journey arm drifts off its target, it's handled relatively quickly. Not always instantly, but it is with urgency. But increasingly, other operators, and sometimes even the big names, don't treat attractions as living assets. They treat them as capital investments. Something that costs a fixed amount, runs on a fixed schedule, and gets minimal reinvestment until it starts affecting guest throughput. And when that's the mindset, sadly, the first thing to go is the show. Suddenly, the animatronic, it doesn't move and there's no plan to fix it. The water mist that used to cool the room, it's gone to save on HVAC costs. The ambient music loop in the queue, well, that's gone too. No one bothered to restart the server. And the motion-based ride vehicle, it's still operating, but just without the motion. And just like that, in an instant, the magic slips through the cracks. The ride, yeah, it still runs, but the soul is gone. And that's why everything we've talked about in this episode truly matters. Because the best attractions are built with longevity in mind, with service access, modular parts, diagnostic tools, and clear documentation so that the show quality can be preserved not just for months, but for decades. And when parks commit to that kind of support, both financial, operational, and cultural, the result is timeless. You get attractions like Indiana Jones Adventure. It's still delivering chills 30 years later thanks to careful preservation of its physical effects and ambient detail. And one of my personal favorites, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man, with media that's been fully remastered and projectors that have been replaced and timing refined. It's truly one of the best attractions of all time. These rides endure because someone backstage cares, because maintenance has the resources and the time and the mandate to keep the show alive. But when that care isn't there, you get rides that look like they just gave up halfway through. You get reskinned log flumes with no climax, half-lit sets, and janky animatronics that barely twitch. You get attractions that feel like a spreadsheet made physical, not a story, not a memory, just a ride. And worst of all, you train guests to expect less, to stop noticing when things are broken, to stop believing that magic is possible. And that's why every phase, from blue sky to soft opening, needs to be built with longevity, clarity, and integrity. Because the build, it's temporary, But the experience lives on, not just in social media clips and first week press, but in the memories of the people who ride it 10 years from now, 20 years, and even 30. If you do it right, that moment, that lift hill, that drop, that final scene, it becomes someone's core memory. It's the thing they remember when they think about being a kid, or falling in love, or visiting a park for the first time with their own children. That's what you're building. And that is why it has to be done well. I want to thank you guys for riding along on this very deep dive into theme park design. I know it's a bit different from my other episodes, but I really want to hear from you guys. Do you like these type of episodes that dive deeper into the process of theme park, and attraction design? I'd also love to know why you're watching this video. Are you an aspiring theme park designer or somebody who's just interested in how these amazing attractions come to life? Definitely let me know in the comments below, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe. And guys, until next time, I will see you at the gift shop. Thanks for listening.